mocked for his speech and looks. A year later, he's the face of a global ad campaign. Before we get into the story, drop a comment and tell us, where in the world are you watching from today? In Harmon Bend, a tiny backwater town in the heart of Mississippi, life ran in tight, predictable circles. Folks knew each other by name, but more often by nickname. Anything new was met with suspicion. Anything strange? Contempt. That's exactly how people looked at Remy Wallace. Like he was something foreign, out of place, better off unseen. He started working at Brooks& Sons Auto Repair right after high school, barely 18. Lanky, awkward, always smudged with engine grease. He lugged around busted tires, fetched tools, mopped floors, and rarely talked back. Even when they yelled at him. Even when they laughed. "Hey, Hollywood!" one of the mechanics hollered one afternoon. Randy Johnson, a mustached greaseball with a permanent smirk. "Bring me some brake fluid, and don't mix it up with water, pretty boy." Remy nodded, walked to the supply closet, brought back what was needed. Didn't say a word. He rarely did. His voice, a scratchy drawl soaked in southern gravel, usually got one of two reactions: smirks or stares. Back in school, the minute he opened his mouth, somebody would mimic him like it was a comedy routine. It didn't take long for him to figure out. The quieter he stayed, the easier things went. But silence wasn't armor thick enough. He stood out. His skin was darker than most around town, his features sharp, bald head catching the sun, and eyes too big, too sad for someone his age. He looked older than the other kids, and somehow more fragile. Even the outcasts gave him a wide berth. Then there was Calvin Thorne, the local bully with bleach blonde hair, a carnivore smile, and a VHS camcorder practically glued to his shoulder. Calvin made it a mission to stalk Remy during lunch breaks while he swept the garage, even behind the dumpster. He'd splice together clips, slap on dumb sound effects and cheesy titles, and drop off the highlight reels at Bill Ronson's old video rental shop. "Now that's comedy," Bill would chuckle, sliding the tape onto the shelf next to Dumb and Dumber. Local talent, right here. Remy knew. He tried once, just once, to ask Calvin to stop filming him. Calvin just laughed, slapped him on the back and said, "Come on, movie star. We're just having fun." After that, Remy stopped saying much of anything. The only person who never laughed was his mother, Ethel Wallace. A middle-aged woman bent from years of working in the church kitchen. She came home late, always smelling of burnt oil and sweat. She didn't have time for long talks, but she always left a plate of food and the TV set off, with the VCR ready. "So you can watch your movies." And Remy watched. Not just the movies. He began collecting discarded tapes, broken camcorders, pieces of old equipment, tried to figure out how it all worked. At night, he'd sneak back into the video store, where Bill, out of some quiet kindness, let him tinker with old gear, so long as you don't get in the way of business. The shop was fading, barely staying afloat. Everyone had cable now, but Remy found something like peace there. Between the faded posters and dusty shelves, he'd set up a tripod, press record, and sit on a wooden crate in front of shelves lined with thrillers and romance flicks. Talk to the camera, clumsy, unsure. Sometimes he'd talk about his day, sometimes about the people who laughed at him. Sometimes he'd just stare into the lens in silence. "My name is Remy," he said in one of the early tapes. "I'm not good at being funny. My voice is weird. I know that. I was born with it. But I just want someone to look at me without laughing." The tapes piled up. He started editing them, cutting out awkward silences, laying in music from old cassettes, sometimes even scoring scenes with Hollywood soundtracks. Sometimes it came out awkward, sometimes kind of beautiful. No one ever saw them. He never showed anyone, not even himself, not really. But sitting there surrounded by broken screens and humming machines, he felt it. Like the camera didn't judge. The camera just listened. Sometimes he'd bring in thrift store clothes, change outfits, act out scenes, not to be funny, to try on someone else's life, someone who lived in a different town, someone whose voice didn't sound like a punchline, but like it mattered. One rainy night, he stayed late. The lights in the store flickered. Thunder grumbled outside. Bill, half asleep behind the counter, waved him off. "Just don't fry the circuits, kid." That night, Remy filmed himself standing still in front of the camera. No talking, just the sound of rain, the unsteady rhythm of his breath, and a look. Tired, stubborn, older than his years. He named the file "The One Who Watches." A few days later, he slid the tape into a stack of others like he always did. Not thinking, not believing anyone would pick it up, but someone would. Not in Harmon Bend. That tape would end up in an old TV set in a small apartment in Atlanta. And in a sea of noise and faces, someone would hear his voice. Shaky, rough, real. But Remy didn't know that yet. He just walked home, kicked off his shoes by the door, ate the pie his mom left out, and lay down on his narrow bed. Tomorrow would bring more tires, more jokes, more silence, but the words echoed in his head. "I just want someone to look at me without laughing." He didn't know someone already was. Remy Wallace always stayed late at Ronson Video, tucked in the corner of Harmon Bend's Main Street, between the pharmacy and the secondhand store. The sign was sun-bleached, the O in video long since dead. Inside, it smelled like old carpet and sun-warped plastic VHS covers. Most teens came in looking for action flicks or Jim Carrey comedies. Remy came for something else. Bill Ronson, the grizzled owner, was one of the few in town who didn't look at Remy with suspicion or scorn. Bill didn't ask questions. He just noticed how Remy carefully stacked empty boxes, how he treated the machines like they mattered, how he paused in front of the mirror in the editing room, like he was searching for something in himself. "You want to mess with the old gear?" Bill said once, not looking up from the register. "Knock yourself out. Just don't break anything. And clean up your trash." In a town of just over 4,000 souls, where everyone knew everyone, or thought they did, the late nights were Remy's salvation. After dark, there were no stares, no muttered jokes behind his back, no dull ache in his chest from feeling like he existed, but didn't quite belong. At night, he became someone else, or maybe just more himself. He'd settle behind the old editing board at Ronson Video, plug in the secondhand camera, prop it up on a tripod in front of a sagging bookshelf, and hit record. These weren't flashy videos. No effects, no music, no punchlines. Just him. Sitting in the soft glow of a flickering lamp, voice low and even, talking about what it's like to grow up when nobody ever tells you, "You're okay just the way you are." He didn't script a word. Remy spoke the way he thought, in a plain voice soaked in deep South drawl, where syllables stretched and drifted like molasses. "I'm not smart," he said in one of the early tapes, eyes straight into the lens. "But I see things. I see how folks look away when I walk in the store. I hear, not what he ought to be. But if you're watching this, then maybe I do exist." He wasn't angry. He didn't ask for sympathy. He just was. Most nights he'd cut 2 or 3 short clips. He trimmed the silences, spliced together thoughts, and always ended with a black screen and the letters RW, his initials. That was the only name he ever gave. He'd label the tapes with numbers, drop them in an old shoebox, and move on. It wasn't for an audience. Not really. It was a kind of diary, except with pixels instead of paper. A quiet way of convincing himself that his thoughts mattered. Sometimes he filmed outside the store, in the crooked old shed behind their house where his mom kept jars, rags, and memories. The walls were warped, but sunlight came in nice during the day. He'd set the tripod on the dirt floor, sit on an upside-down paint bucket, and talk. Sometimes about school, how he never got paired up in biology class. Sometimes about college, how he wanted to go, but didn't even have the money to apply. And sometimes about his mother, Ethel, who woke up every morning at 5 a.m. to boil buckwheat and chicken gizzards for the parish kitchen. She says a man's got to learn to stomach hard work, even when it tastes bitter, he once said, almost smiling. The only person who knew about the tapes was Bill, but he never asked about them. Or if he did, he kept it to himself. And then one day everything changed. Or maybe it was always headed this way. Bill Ronson hosted a weekly slot on the local cable channel called Voices of Harmon Bend. It was nothing special. School plays, backyard talent shows, farmers talking about crop rotation. It aired late Friday nights. One week, Bill didn't have enough footage. The kids never sent in their videos, and the farmers weren't in a talking mood. So Bill, rummaging through the boxes, popped in one of Remy's tapes without much thought. The clip was simple. Remy, sitting at a bus stop, talked about overhearing someone say, "That black kid looks like he's from another planet," and how for a split second he wondered, what if they're right? What if I'll never belong here? Outside Harmon Bend, nobody would have noticed that broadcast. But in an apartment in Atlanta, the TV was still on. Anita Crawford, a junior producer with a sharp eye for unusual faces, was flipping through scripts when she heard the voice. Low, slow, not trying to impress anyone. It stopped her cold. She looked up. There on the screen sat a boy who didn't quite meet the camera's gaze. His ears stuck out a little too far, his hair was patchy, his skin had a dull sheen to it. Not ugly, just real. And he was saying, "I don't believe you gotta be pretty to be real. But I believe if you ain't real, you don't become anything. No self-pity, just truth." Anita didn't turn off the TV until the credits rolled. She wrote down the name of the show, found Bill Ronson in the phone book, tracked down the video store address, and sent a letter the next morning. In it, she wrote that she wanted to find that boy, that this wasn't a casting call, it wasn't a gimmick, it was an opportunity, and that his voice, quiet, honest, unpolished, was something the world needed to hear. Remy, meanwhile, was cutting another tape. He didn't know he'd already been seen, didn't know Bill had aired anything. He was just doing what he always did, surviving. A few days later, Bill handed him an envelope without a word. Inside was a typed letter and a business card. Anita Crawford, Atlanta Media Solutions. Remy read the letter 4 times. The words didn't all make sense, but one line stuck out. "If you're still speaking to the camera, maybe it's time the camera spoke back." He didn't quite know what that meant, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, someone had heard him. The next morning, Remy stood by the side of the road, waiting for the bus to Atlanta. The sky above Harmon Bend was a pale, hesitant gray, like it couldn't decide whether to rain or not. He held a battered old satchel with a comb, a clean shirt, and the envelope with the studio address. The jacket he wore had belonged to an uncle who died back in '92. It was too big in the shoulders and smelled faintly of old soap. His mother, Ethel, stood beside him. She didn't say much. Just as the bus rounded the bend, she leaned in and whispered, "Don't let them tell you who you are. That's yours to decide." Remy nodded but didn't answer. He wasn't sure he understood her fully, but he remembered every word. The ride took nearly 6 hours. The bus stopped at forgotten gas stations, crumbling terminals, Tupelo, Birmingham, towns that seemed like they were holding their breath. By the time they pulled into Atlanta, it was nearly dark. His legs were stiff, his mouth dry, and his stomach growling. Atlanta looked unreal. Glass towers, highway ramps stacked like toy tracks, flashing billboards 20 feet tall. He'd never been further than the next county over. The studio was in a business district, sleek, concrete, clean. Security guards at the gate, people in suits moving fast, like they were late for something important. No one noticed the skinny kid in the oversized jacket. He showed the letter to the receptionist, a woman with too much blush and a look that said she'd seen weirder things. She led him down a hallway and pointed to a waiting room. He sat down and waited. The waiting room was full of guys who looked nothing like Remy. White, polished, hair perfectly styled, dressed like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Some were rehearsing lines off their phones, others checking themselves out in the mirror. One of them glanced at Remy, leaned toward his buddy, and muttered, "You see who else they dragged in? What is this? Some kind of diversity stunt?" They laughed. Remy heard it, didn't flinch, just sat down in the corner and stared at the floor. 20 minutes later, they called his name. The room they brought him into was all bright lights and cold air. 3 people sat behind a long table. A man with a gold watch, a woman with a notepad, and someone already buried in a laptop screen. A camera was set up in the corner. Nobody greeted him. No one asked how he was. The woman slid a sheet of paper across the table and said, "Read this." Loud and clear. It was a simple tagline for a denim ad. "You choose who you are." Remy started reading. Quietly at first, then louder, but his southern drawl came through heavy. The words didn't quite fit his tongue. He stretched the vowels, clipped the endings, the way folks back home talked. The woman shot a glance at the man. He winced. "Again," the man said, with more confidence. Remy tried. His voice shook. He knew he sounded off. He knew he didn't belong there. But he finished anyway. One of them leaned back, smirking. "Interesting pick, but this isn't your lane, kid." No cruelty in it, just a verdict, like they were telling him he'd walked into the wrong room. Remy didn't argue, didn't ask for a second chance. He just left. Back at the station, he unwrapped the sandwich he'd packed that morning, took one look and couldn't eat. The city outside the glass felt like another world. Too big, too fast, too smooth. He didn't fit, and he knew it. Not because someone told him so, but because everything around him echoed it. He wasn't scared to go back to Harmon Bend because of what people might say. No one believed in him there anyway. He was scared because he'd made himself a promise. If he ever took a leap, he wouldn't half-ass it. 2 days later, he was back at the auto shop. Grease under his nails, oil in the air, the usual shouting from the sidewalk. Everything was just like before. He barely spoke, told his mama it just didn't work out. She nodded, didn't press. 2 weeks passed. Then came the envelope. Remy never got mail, not unless it was a bill or a pizza coupon. But this one was different. Tidy handwriting in the corner. Anita Crawford. Inside, a short handwritten note. "I saw how they looked at you. I saw how it felt. But I've got a different project. We're not looking for voices or accents. We're looking for people. Real ones. Can you come back? This time will be different." Remy read it over and over. Couldn't believe someone had actually seen him. Not his stuttered words, not his thrift store jacket, not his 2 big ears. Him. The part nobody else bothered to look for. He didn't know who Anita really was, but he knew one thing. He couldn't say no. Atlanta felt different this time. Not exactly warm, but not as cold either. The sidewalks buzzed with students, coffee cups, people in sneakers and business jackets. Nobody stared, nobody sneered, but nobody smiled either. And that, in a way, felt honest. This was a city that didn't care who you were, and maybe that was a kind of freedom. At the station, he held the letter again, worn from all the times he'd folded it and read it by lamplight. Just plain white paper, printed on a cheap home printer. At the bottom, her signature, A. A little crooked, it said, "Don't give up. There's another project. I want you to try again. It'll be different this time." He'd scraped together bus fare, borrowed a duffel from Bill Ronson, and set off again. The studio was in an industrial part of town, a gray building with no sign, just a keypad by a metal door. He stood there gripping the strap of his bag until a woman around 30 came out in jeans and a baseball cap, hair pulled back in a messy bun. It was Anita. No big entrance, no fake smile. She just nodded and said, "Remy, you came. Good. Let's not waste time." She led him through narrow halls that smelled like dust, stale coffee, and old tech. Black and white photos lined the walls. Shirtless bodies, clown makeup, strange angles. Not a single face looked like his. Remy knew that. He'd already been here once. But this time had to be different. Somehow. The studio was empty. No director, no stylist. Just one camera guy. Tall, white, serious looking, with long arms like a conductor's. He adjusted the camera without saying a word. Anita dragged a chair to the center of the floor. No backdrop, no lighting rig, just a single ceiling lamp casting a soft shadow on the concrete. "Sit," she said, calm and steady. He sat, his hands curled into fists. She nodded at the cameraman who hit record. The camera hummed to life. "No script today," Anita said. "Just talk, like you're back in that shed." Remy swallowed hard. He could feel the heat rising in his neck. That same shed, the one behind the house filled with empty jars and rags, where he used to set up the tripod and speak into the dark, where no one rolled their eyes or told him he was wrong, where he talked about sitting alone in school while the other kids shared snacks and secrets, where he remembered his mama washing clothes by hand to save money, where he admitted that sometimes just leaving the house felt like walking into an ambush. Now he was here, and the camera was finally listening. He didn't speak at first. Then the words came. His voice wavered. "I've always been different. That's what they told me. Sometimes with words, sometimes just with a look. In Harmon Bend, everybody knows everybody. If you don't fit the mold, you don't get invited. That's it. No one sits next to you. No one asks how you're doing." He looked straight into the camera. "People filmed me, but not for anything good. Not for commercials, for laughs. When I dropped a bottle of oil in the shop, when my pants ripped, they filmed that, passed it around town like a joke on repeat. And I thought, maybe if I filmed myself in my own way, someone might finally see me for real and stop laughing." He paused. Anita stayed silent. The cameraman kept working the lens, adjusting focus. Smooth, quiet, no interruptions. "My mom used to say, 'You gotta be strong, Remy. They're not gonna change, but you can be someone who doesn't break.' She washed dishes in the church kitchen, 8 hours straight. I saw her hands swell up so bad she couldn't hold a fork. Then she'd come home and press my shirt so I'd look like someone. I never knew what to say to her. I just nodded." His shoulders dropped slightly. "I used to think the stage wasn't meant for people like me. But then I realized it doesn't belong to the beautiful. It belongs to the brave, to the ones who speak, even if their voice cracks, even if their face doesn't look like a magazine cover." Anita gave the cameraman a subtle nod. He stopped recording. Remy looked up. There was no applause, no fake encouragement, just silence. But it was a clean silence, one without judgment. "We're sending it," Anita said simply. "You've got a shot. We're not fixing anything. No lighting tricks, no airbrushing, no filters. What we see is what we show." He nodded. He didn't need her to explain. He knew. This was the moment he came here for. No mask, no script, just him. 3 months later, fall had settled in. And there it was, right in the middle of Atlanta, towering above the streets, a massive black and white billboard. Remy's face, no edits, no slogans, just one line. "Darman. Real is in all of us." No last name, no celebrity tie-in, no glossy branding. People stopped and stared. Some took pictures, some just frowned, others smiled. The face didn't fit the mold. It didn't sell wealth or sex or perfection. It just said, "I'm here, I'm real, and maybe you are too." Back in Harmon Bend, Bill Ronson saw the ad in the newspaper. He adjusted his glasses, squinted a little, then recognized that face. Carefully, he cut out the page and pinned it behind the counter. Customers noticed. Nobody laughed. Ethel Wallace got the clipping from a neighbor. She spread the paper out on her kitchen table and stared for a long while. Then she sat down, closed her eyes, and whispered, he finally heard himself. The first mentions came from niche corners of the ad world. Industry blogs and small creative magazines started talking about the new Darman campaign, how it ditched the polish, the models, the rehearsed lines. Just a black and white video of a guy sitting on a wooden crate, speaking into the camera. Not slick, just honest. His voice had a soft, southern drawl, full of long pauses and gentle hesitations. He spoke like he was still surprised someone was listening, but he kept going. At first, it seemed like the video would get lost. Too slow, too quiet. But something about its pace and raw awkwardness stuck with people. One user on a fashion forum wrote, I don't know how this guy ended up in an ad campaign, but I can't stop thinking about his face. A week later, the post had thousands of reposts. Buzz Weekly picked it up. So did Vice New York. Then came YouTube breakdowns, TikTok stitches, Reddit debates. Who is he? Why does he talk like he's still waiting to be cut off? Why can't we look away? His name came later. Remy Wallace, Mississippi, age 23. Online sleuths dug up scraps, a forgotten username on an old forum, a dusty MySpace profile with a single photo. Remy and his mom outside a roadside diner. He was a blank slate, no past roles, no brand history, just a face and questions. That mystery made him go viral. Up in the Darman offices on the 5th floor in Atlanta, the team watched the numbers spike. They hadn't expected this. The whole project was meant to be an art statement, a little rebellion against the slickness of modern ads. Casting Remy had been a gamble. Not everyone agreed. One creative called the footage too uncomfortable. A manager even said, he talks like he's apologizing. But Anita Crawford pushed back. That is the power, she said. He's not performing. Now that the views were climbing and TikTok was ablaze, no one argued anymore. The press followed. The Washington Post ran a column titled, The Ad That Made Me Go Silent. The critic described stumbling on the video and being unable to click away. That face, he wrote, doesn't demand your attention. It just exists. And that's what makes it powerful. Vogue ran a spread. Honesty on the cover, the face of what's next. They didn't retouch his skin. Just a close-up. Dark under eyes, sharp cheekbones, uneven tone. No filters, no Photoshop. The caption? Remy Wallace, just him. In Harmon Bend, Mississippi, the buzz came slowly. It wasn't the kind of town that cared about ad campaigns. People there were more tuned into weather forecasts and ballgame scores. But when Remy's black and white portrait showed up in the front window of the old clothing shop, word spread. Some folks didn't believe it. That ain't him, just looks like him. Others started remembering. The kid who used to work at Duke's garage, the quiet one, talked kind of funny, remember? No one quite knew what to feel, especially the ones who used to laugh the loudest. Calvin Thorne, the guy who once filmed Remy dropping a wrench and posted it for laughs, now sat at the gas station counter flipping through a magazine. There was the photo, Remy's face, bold and still. Calvin didn't know what he felt. Shame, jealousy, or maybe something else. Some quiet, unsettled sense that time had spun around and passed its own verdict in silence. Back in Atlanta, Remy wasn't saying much. He watched. It felt strange, the way people now asked him to smile, not to force it, but because it fit the brand. He didn't know how to be that version of himself. On set, stylists fussed, cameras clicked, people told him where to stand and how to move. It was a lot. Inside, he was still that same kid from Harmon Bend. He still didn't know what to do with his hands when the camera rolled. He still spoke quietly and braced for someone to cut him off. But now, no one did. Anita stepped into his dressing room one afternoon. She didn't say much, just sat beside him and said quietly, "You don't have to talk if you don't want to. Sometimes silence works too." He nodded, and for the first time in weeks, he let himself breathe. 2 weeks later, he took the train home. The agency had offered to fly him first class, but he turned it down. He wanted to watch the landscape change, wanted to see the trees he grew up with slowly come into view one by one. He needed to feel the road back, not just arrive. He sat by the window the whole ride, a small box in his lap. Inside, a glossy magazine with his photo on the cover. He was bringing it to his mother. Harmon Ben greeted him on a gray morning. The station was nearly empty, 5 people at most, but among them stood Ethel, same black jacket, same worn boots. She looked like she'd never left that spot. Only her eyes were different. She didn't cry. She didn't run to him. She just stood there, watching. He walked up, took her hand gently, and said, "I just wanted you to see it." She didn't answer, just gave a quiet nod and squeezed his fingers tighter. That evening, they ate fried fish in the kitchen. No TV, no noise, just them. Neighbors stopped by, some to say hi, others just to stare, and a few to apologize. One boy, couldn't have been more than 15, stood outside their window holding a homemade sign that read, "Remy is our hero." Remy didn't go out to meet him. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't a hero. He just stopped staying silent. Later that night, he stepped into the backyard. The old shed was still standing, crooked, dusty, the door half hanging from one hinge. Inside, everything was right where he'd left it. The old camera, an empty coffee can, a few scraps of film. He flipped on the light, sat down on the same wooden crate, and looked into the lens. "This is where it all started," he said quietly. And this time, for the first time, he didn't look away. Exactly a year had passed since the black and white video of Remy's quiet confession hit billboards in Atlanta, then across the country. In an industry built on airbrush perfection and impossible standards, the campaign had landed like a thunderclap, shocking, raw, and liberating. On screen wasn't a polished model or a celebrity face. It was a tall, lanky kid with thinning hair, skin too dark for the old rules, and a slow southern drawl. But what shook people most, he wasn't acting. No spin, no polish, just truth. And for the first time in a long time, people didn't flinch. They leaned in. Some saw themselves. Some saw their brother. Some, finally, heard a voice that sounded like their own. Not as a punchline, not as a gimmick, just as a person. Now, Remy lived in Atlanta, a small room in Inman Park, not far from the studio. Quiet streets, leafy sidewalks, and a corner bakery where he stopped every morning for black coffee and oatmeal cookies. The cashier stopped pretending she didn't recognize him long ago. Now she just nodded like they'd known each other for years. His apartment was sparse, a bed, a desk, and a tripod with a camera. No luxury, no labels, just a stack of old VHS tapes in the drawer and a frameless mirror on the wall. He still filmed himself, not for anyone else, just to remember where it began. But a lot had changed. He no longer waited by the door, hoping someone would give him a shot. Now, brands called him first, not just to wear their clothes, but to speak for them, to be the face, the voice, the message. Still, the real shift wasn't about contracts or campaigns. It was in how he used the attention. He started sitting in on casting sessions, not as an actor, but on the other side of the table, with Anita Crawford, who had become more than his agent, a true partner. They'd go through tapes and headshots of first-timers, not models, just people. Some of them trembled. Some said nothing. Some looked into the camera and whispered, "I don't even know why I'm here. Someone told me I wasn't the right type." Remy would listen, sometimes nod, sometimes just sit in silence and leave the tape rolling. Later in the editing room, he and Anita would talk, not about cheekbones or posture or perfect smiles, but about presence, about truth. Did this person have that same raw honesty he once tried so hard to protect, even when it cost him everything? It was during one of those meetings that Remy insisted the next Darman campaign include a teenage boy with severe acne, a girl with a missing arm, and a stuttering young man. The team hesitated. One creative director finally blurted out, "This is going to be too much. People aren't ready." Remy looked him dead in the eye. "They said the same thing about me." No one pushed back after that. He started visiting schools, no fanfare, no velvet ropes. He just showed up, sat down on a folding chair in gymnasiums packed with kids. Sometimes he took the mic, sometimes not. When he spoke, it was brief. No monologues, no flashy lines. "I wasn't the smartest. I wasn't cool. I wasn't the one people expected on stage. But one day I realized, if I can't accept myself, why should anyone else?" And sometimes he'd just linger by the lockers afterward, overhearing quiet whispers from kids saying, "He's like me." He didn't see his mom as often now, but they were closer than ever. Ethel Wallace still worked the church kitchen. Every month, Remy made the trip to Harmon Bend, not in a limo, no cameras, just a regular train. He'd walk the dusty road from the station past the same yards, where teens no longer pointed or laughed. Now some of them posted throwback photos with captions like "Our Remy," but he didn't let it go to his head. He remembered what it felt like to be the one no one invited to the table. Sometimes he'd stop by the old video rental store. Bill Ronson, now retired and handing the shop to his nephew, still came in every morning. He kept Remy's original tapes in a box behind the counter. "Let 'em see where it started," he'd say. And people did, because once upon a time, one honest VHS tape didn't just change Remy's life. It cracked something open in all of us. At one point, a film studio offered Remy a role. Not a commercial, a real movie. The script showed up in the mail. The story was solid, a teenager searching for his father. But the character was written as cool and magnetic. It wasn't him. Remy turned it down, not out of ego. He just said, "I don't know how to play someone I've never been." Instead of taking the movie role, Remy made a short film, wrote it himself, shot it, edited it in his room. Same old camera on a tripod, same bare walls, no makeup, no special lighting, just him, talking. Not about fame, not about success, but about the nights he still wakes up, heart pounding, convinced that all of it, the campaigns, the covers, the interviews, was a mistake. He spoke about loneliness, about the fear of disappearing, about what it feels like to be the face of a brand, and still wonder if you're really seen. The video went up on YouTube. No viral explosion, no dramatic music, but it traveled, quietly, from phone to phone. Teenagers sent it to friends. Teachers shared it in class. Mothers passed it to their kids. Remy's words were simple, but in them was something so many had been starving for. Truth, spoken with no bitterness, no pose, just honesty. Now his face hung on a massive banner in the Atlanta airport. Thousands walked past it every day. Some recognized him, most didn't. Didn't matter. Remy walked through the terminal with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a quiet smile on his face. Not for the cameras, not for anyone else, but because for the first time in a long time, he believed it himself. He hadn't turned into someone else. He hadn't become prettier, or smoother, or cleaner. He had just become visible. And more importantly, he'd made others visible too. People who once looked like he used to feel. There was no miracle in Remy Wallace's life. No genius mentor who saw his potential. No secret door that led to easy. Just a kid, a black boy from Mississippi, with a voice that, at first, made people laugh, then made them pause, and eventually made them listen. He didn't take down the system. He didn't reinvent the whole industry, but he changed one person, himself. And somehow that was enough to change how thousands saw themselves. Because the real revolution wasn't becoming someone new. It was refusing to disappear. Not hiding your face, but showing it. Not faking confidence, but walking forward with shaking hands anyway. Maybe you were never invited to the table either. Maybe someone told you you don't fit the look. Maybe your voice sounds off to people who only know one kind of voice. But if Remy's story says anything, it's this. It's not about how the world sees you. It's about how you choose to move through it. Not loud, not perfect, just real. You don't have to be normal to matter. You don't have to be easy to understand to be heard. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is not flinch when you look in the mirror. Just stay. And if this story touched something in you, know this. There are more people like Remy than you think. We tell the stories of those who live behind the scenes, the ones who felt invisible but refused to break. Subscribe to the channel if you want to hear them, because truth will always be stronger than the image. And you're part of that truth too.